He once knelt on a battlefield, hands shaking in the dirt, listening to voices he couldn't save fade into the night. Years later, he spends his days in a quiet office, letting routine steady his hands while his mind tries to wander where he refuses to follow. But the past never stays quiet. It moves with him through every still moment, until one ordinary morning, something arrived that pulled his past and present together. A pale autumn sun hovered above the small mountain town, its light spreading thinly over the quiet streets like a shawl too delicate to keep anyone warm. Daniel Hart, 59 years old, and built like a man who once carried more weight, professionally and emotionally, than any single person should, stepped onto his porch and pulled the door closed behind him. His house was modest, a one-story structure with faded blue siding and a front yard dotted with stubborn wildflowers clinging to the last days of fall. Daniel wore his signature outfit, the red and black buffalo plaid shirt jacket with soft but durable fabric, the cream-colored t-shirt beneath it, dark indigo jeans slightly worn at the knees, and his well-broken-in brown leather boots. On his left wrist rested the military watch he had worn ever since his days in the rescue unit. It was scratched at the edges, the band darkened by sweat and years of sun, but he could not part with it. It held time for him when he no longer could. His once strong physique had slimmed over the last decade. Broad shoulders still remained, but there was a tired slouch to them, as though invisible hands pressed down on his back. Deep lines carved his forehead and framed his eyes that were gentle, amber brown, but shadowed by exhaustion and memory. Those eyes had seen people he could not save, moments that replayed themselves in the quietest corners of every night. He inhaled deeply, the mountain air crisp and thin, hoping it might quiet the ache lodged behind his ribs. It never did for long. Behind him, inside the house, claws clicked eagerly on the wood floor, followed by a low, familiar huff. Rex emerged, nudging the screen door open with practiced ease. The German Shepherd, 7 years old, strong-boned, with a thick tan and black coat, bounded down the steps. Scars scattered along his flank hinted at a former life and training, shaped by discipline and danger. His ears were alert, always swiveling. His dark eyes intelligent, yet softened when he looked at Daniel. Rex was loyal in a way few creatures, human or otherwise, ever were. Daniel often wondered if Rex sensed pain, not by smell or sight, but by intuition. They shared the same quiet wounds, the same unspoken history. "All right, buddy," Daniel murmured, running a hand briefly through the dog's fur. "Let's get to it." The real estate office expected him by 8. Another house to evaluate, another seller hoping for a miracle, another buyer pretending the mountains made them immortal. Daniel didn't resent the work. It kept his hands busy and his mind from drifting somewhere he preferred it not to go. Still, every day felt like a loop he couldn't break. Wake, work, return to an empty home. Listen to silence settle around him like dust. He and Rex climbed into the truck, the dog settling into the back seat with a long sigh, head resting on his paws. Daniel started the engine, but before backing out, he glanced at the passenger, sat not at another person, but at the absence of one. For nearly 40 years, he had imagined driving to work beside someone who would ask about his day or remind him to buy milk. Life had not followed that script. He tried not to linger on why. The drive through town was slow and familiar. Pinewood Ridge was the kind of place where everyone knew who fixed their roof, who coached their grandkids' baseball team, and who baked pies for the church fundraiser. The autumn leaves blazed bright orange and gold on both sides of the road, swirling occasionally when a gust swept down from the mountains. As Daniel drove toward the office, he watched a woman sweep her front porch. A thin, elderly woman with snow-white hair pinned back neatly, wearing an oversized green sweater. She waved at him. This was Mrs. Langley, who had lived here longer than the street had existed. She had a gentle voice, but an iron memory, and believed the world was still full of good people if you looked in the right places. Daniel nodded politely, but the moment the truck moved on, his smile fell. He admired people like her, people who trusted the world. He wished he still could. At the office, Daniel parked and stepped outside. The chill in the air pinched his cheeks. He walked toward the glass front door, Rex trotting behind, only to find someone waiting inside. A man in his early 40s, with a round face, sandy hair, and a suit jacket too tight for his barrel chest. This was Matt Benson, Daniel's co-worker and occasional headache. Matt was loud where Daniel was quiet, impulsive where Daniel was cautious. But he wasn't unkind, just unaware of the weight others carried. "Morning, Dan," Matt exclaimed, clapping him on the back. "Listen, big morning for you. The boss wants a word." Daniel felt his stomach stiffen instinctively. A word from the boss rarely meant something pleasant. Matt, oblivious to Daniel's shift in posture, continued, "It's about a property up north. Abandoned place. Kinda spooky, honestly. Perfect assignment for you." "Spooky?" Daniel raised an eyebrow. "What does that even mean?" "You'll see," Matt grinned. "Boss says it's a mess, but potentially profitable with the right buyer." Daniel nodded slowly, though unease prickled under his jacket. Rex sensed it, stepping closer to Daniel's side, brushing against his leg. Their boss, Margaret Pierce, stepped out of her office at that moment. Margaret was a woman in her early 60s, tall, with short silver hair and sharp green eyes behind thin-framed glasses. She dressed with a kind of professional crispness, navy slacks, a tailored blazer, and moved with quiet confidence. Despite her poised exterior, she carried a softness toward Daniel, something closest to maternal concern. Years of managing agents had given her the uncanny ability to read the emotional weather inside anyone who walked through her door. "Daniel," she said, her voice warm but businesslike, "I've got a property I want you to inspect today. Old house on North Ridge. Long abandoned. The town is talking about repurposing the land, but first we need an assessment." Daniel swallowed. "North Ridge? That's pretty isolated." "Yes," she agreed, "which is why I need someone thorough, someone who sees things clearly." He wasn't sure if that was praise or a reminder of his scars. Margaret hesitated for a moment, studying him the way one might study a fragile object. Carefully, respectfully, yet aware it could break. "You all right to take this one?" she asked. The truth was no. He wasn't all right with much these days. Nights came heavy, mornings came reluctantly, and there were moments, small, sharp ones, when he felt as though he was drifting farther from the world he once belonged to. But work was work, and the road was better than the silence at home. "Yeah," he said quietly, "I can take it." Margaret nodded. "Good, I'll email you the file." Matt gave a thumbs up. "You're the man for the job, Dan. Daniel forced a tight smile and turned toward the door, Rex pacing beside him. Outside, the air had grown colder. Gray clouds gathered above the ridge like something brooding. Daniel opened the truck door, Rex hopping inside with a grunt. He paused before sliding into the driver's seat, staring for a moment at his reflection in the window. At the tired man with the plaid jacket, the scars in his eyes deeper than the ones on his hands. He didn't know why, but dread pooled in his chest as though someone had whispered a warning he couldn't yet understand. He started the engine. The truck rumbled to life, and as he drove toward the abandoned home on North Ridge, Rex suddenly lifted his head, ears sharp, eyes narrowed at something in the trees. Something Daniel had not seen. Something that, at that moment, he would have dismissed entirely, had the hairs on the back of his own neck not risen too. The truck rumbled along the narrowing dirt road, its tires grinding over stone and mud as pine trees grew denser on both sides. The air carried the chill of late autumn, and Daniel kept one hand on the steering wheel while the other absent-mindedly tugged at the cuff of his red and black jacket. A nervous gesture he barely noticed anymore. Rex sat upright in the passenger seat today instead of the back. The German Shepherd's thick coat bristled faintly each time the wind blew in from the cracked window. His nose twitched, capturing scents only he could decipher. Damp bark, old timber, and something else buried deeper, a trace of time long gone. Daniel tried to focus on the road ahead, but the unease that had begun that morning lingered, pressing gently against the back of his mind. The file Margaret sent him described an abandoned two-story wooden home, structurally compromised, which was bureaucratic shorthand for rotting, possibly dangerous, and definitely not worth the trouble. Yet the house had a name, an unusual detail not often found in property records. In faded ink, the document labeled it Harbor Home. That small detail tightened something in Daniel's chest. Homes with names carried stories. Stories carried people. And people left shadows behind. The road ended at a clearing perched on the ridge. The house stood about 40 feet away, half concealed by overgrown shrubs and trees shedding their gold and brown leaves. The structure was indeed sagging. The left side of the roof dipped inward, like a wounded shoulder unable to hold its own weight. Shingles lay scattered across the ground. A narrow porch wrapped around the front, its railing snapped in two places, and on the door hung a wooden sign, weather-beaten but still legible, Harbor Home. Daniel cut the engine. Silence settled instantly, thick and watchful. Rex let out a low huff, not a growl, but a sound of recognition mixed with alertness. Daniel stepped out, boots crunching on the carpet of dead leaves. The air smelled of mold and soil, but also something faint, like the echo of warm smoke from a fire long gone cold. He approached the house slowly. The closer he came, the more the years showed themselves. Burn marks on the lower right corner of the siding, warped window frames, boards that had clearly been replaced in a hurry decades ago. Someone had patched this house once with the urgency of saving it from collapse. Then, for whatever reason, they stopped. Rex guided himself a step ahead, nose skimming the ground, tail low, but wagging once in greeting at the strange story the soil seemed to tell. Daniel placed a hand on the railing. It wobbled dangerously. "Well, buddy," he murmured, "guess we're in for a long inspection." A voice behind him startled him from thought. "You there to tear it down?" It belonged to an older woman standing at the edge of the clearing. She wore a worn brown coat buttoned to her neck and held a cloth tote bag at her side. Her hair, steel gray, frizzy, pulled loosely into a low bun, framed a face both stern and kind, with sharp cheekbones softened by wrinkles etched deeply from years of smiling or worrying, or both. She was of average height, but carried herself with the determined posture of someone who had survived more than she spoke of. Her name, as she soon introduced it, was Martha Green. "I live down the hill," she said, stepping closer. "Saw your truck come up. Not many do these days." Daniel nodded politely. "I'm assessing the property, not tearing anything down myself." Her dark eyes glinted with relief and something wary. "Good, because this house doesn't deserve a bulldozer." Daniel studied her more closely. She must have been in her early 70s. Her hands were knotted with age, but strong, her gaze steady. She seemed like someone who tended gardens, who patched her own clothes, who remembered details even the earth had forgotten. "You know the place?" he asked. "Know it?" She gave a small, sad smile. "My sister stayed here once, when things were bad." Daniel waited, giving her time. Martha breathed in slowly. This house was a haven, built by a veteran returned from war, Elias Warren. Tall man, wide shoulders, dark beard, kind eyes. The kind of man who carried storms inside, but used them to shelter others, not harm them. Her voice dropped. "He's gone now. 30 years, give or take." Daniel swallowed. A veteran building shelter for people who needed refuge. He felt the echo of it deep inside. Something almost like kinship, reaching across decades. He used his wounds to build something good, Daniel thought. What have I done with mine? Martha stepped to the porch, running her hand along one of the broken beams. Women, children, anyone who needed a safe place would come here. Elias fixed the house every time it flooded or caught fire or fell into disrepair. But when he passed, she looked at the home not with nostalgia, but with mourning. There was no one left who knew how to keep it alive. Daniel glanced at Rex, who stood still beside him, ears forward. The dog's posture mirrored Daniel's internal tension, listening, absorbing, questioning. "The fire damage," Daniel said softly, pointing at the scorched boards. "What happened?" Martha's jaw tightened. Someone wanted a woman dragged back home, didn't like that she had a safe place to run to. It wasn't the kind of story Daniel needed to hear to understand. He had seen that darkness overseas, had seen it at home too, tucked away behind closed doors and polite greetings. "Did anyone?" "No," she said quickly. "No one died. Elias got everyone out, barely, but the house was never the same afterward, like it remembered the fear." Daniel turned back toward Harbor Home. The windows were dusty, but through one he saw the faint outline of an old wooden chair toppled on its side, cobwebs connecting leg to floor. Shadows stretched across the floorboards like uninvited guests. "The town wants to sell the land," Martha continued. "Developers want fancy cabins, spas, all that nonsense. They say it'll bring business." She touched the wooden sign gently. "But no one remembers what this place meant." "You do," Daniel said. "Remembering isn't enough," she whispered. "Someone needs to care again." Rex approached her then, sniffing her coat with curiosity, before leaning his head lightly against her leg. Martha reached down to scratch behind his ear. "Smart boy," she murmured. "He's got the look of one who's seen too much." Daniel exhaled. "We both have." They stood in silence for a moment. Leaves rustled. A raven called from a branch overhead. And somewhere in the woods, a distant snap echoed. Maybe a deer, maybe a falling limb, or something else. Daniel stepped up to the door and pushed it open with a groan of rusted hinges. Dust swirled in the golden slant of afternoon sunlight. The interior smelled of old smoke, mildew, and forgotten memories. A narrow staircase leaned crookedly against the wall. The fireplace was blackened, its stones cracked. On the far side, a pair of children's rain boots, tiny, light blue, sat abandoned beneath a bench. Rex padded in first, nose close to the floor, tail stiff. Daniel followed. The house felt inhabited, but not by people, by echoes, by footsteps that had never been erased. "I've seen enough," Martha said from the doorway, voice faint. "The rest is up to you." "Up to me?" Daniel turned. "Why?" She stared at him, the kind of stare that looked past bones and skin into the softest part of a person. "Because I can tell you're the kind of man Elias would have trusted, and this place?" She gestured around them, her voice trembling slightly. "Has been waiting for someone like that." Daniel wanted to protest, wanted to correct her, wanted to say she was wrong about him, that he hadn't been someone to trust for a long time. But before he could speak, Rex suddenly stiffened. His ears shot forward. A low growl, not angry, but warning, rumbled quietly in his chest. Daniel froze. The air shifted subtly, as though someone had opened a door in a sealed memory. Martha's expression changed instantly. Eyes sharp, body tense. "What's wrong?" Daniel whispered. Rex's growl grew deeper. His gaze locked on the staircase, a staircase that should have been empty. Daniel felt the hairs on his arms stand up. Something, someone, had disturbed the dust on the steps. Tracks. Faint, but fresh, and not animal. Martha's voice trembled. "Daniel, you weren't expecting anyone else, were you?" He didn't answer, because he already knew the truth. Whoever had been inside Harbor Home was still here. For a long moment, Daniel stood frozen at the bottom of the staircase, staring at the faint, fresh footprints pressed into the dust. The air inside Harbor Home felt too still, as though the house itself were holding its breath. Rex's low growl thrummed against the floorboards, his body tense, shoulders raised, every instinct in him tuned to warning. Daniel swallowed once, forcing calm into his voice, even as unease curled inside his chest like a tightening fist. "Easy, boy," he whispered, though the words were meant for himself as much as for Rex. The German Shepherd took a cautious step forward, then paused, waiting for Daniel's cue. But before the veteran could react further, a sudden gust of wind swept through the doorway, rattling a loose shutter upstairs and sending flakes of dust drifting from the rafters. The sound snapped the tension long enough for Daniel to exhale. The footprints, though fresh, were small, light. Not the heavy steps of a violent man or an intruder with obvious intent. And after another minute of listening, of waiting for a creak or a breath, or any sign of movement, the house yielded nothing. Whoever or whatever had been here was gone. Martha, standing by the porch, clutched her tote bag closer. "Sometimes," she murmured, "old houses remember their past in strange ways." Daniel didn't fully believe that, but he didn't entirely dismiss it either. War had taught him to trust patterns in silence as much as patterns in sound. "I need to finish the inspection," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. "If someone's using this place as shelter, We should know. Martha nodded, but took several steps back. I'll be at my home if you need anything. Holler loud. I might be old, but my ears work better than these knees. She offered a tight, encouraging smile before turning and carefully walking down the hill, leaving Daniel and Rex alone with the hollow, watching house. Once her footsteps faded, Daniel rubbed the back of his neck, then clicked his tongue. Rex relaxed fractionally, though his ears remained perked. They explored the rest of the first floor. Nothing but broken chairs, a few rotted blankets, water-damaged floorboards, and then returned to the living room where the old fireplace stood. The smell near the hearth was different from the rest of the house, not just mold or ash. Something metallic, something hidden. Rex was the first to react. He approached the wall beside the fireplace, sniffed once, huffed, then let out a quiet, insistent growl. He pawed the lower part of the wall, one of the wooden boards, scratching lightly as if telling Daniel, "Here." Daniel crouched down. The board was loose, the edges slightly lifted compared to the others. He braced his hands against the cool wood and tugged gently until the plank popped free with a dusty sigh. Behind it was a narrow cavity barely big enough for a shoebox. Inside sat a rusted tin container, rectangular once painted, green, now reduced to chipped flakes and orange corrosion. Daniel lifted it out carefully. The metal was cold in his hands, lighter than it looked, and rattled faintly when moved. Rex sat beside him, tail sweeping once across the dusty floor, his amber eyes fixed on the box with steady focus. "All right, let's see," Daniel whispered. He pried the lid open. Inside lay a stack of letters, folded carefully, some tied with brittle string, some loose. The pages had yellowed with age, edges curled, ink fading but still readable. A faint scent rose from them, dust and time, but also something human. Perfume oil, candle smoke, fear pressed into paper, hope squeezed between every written line. Daniel's throat tightened before he even unfolded the first letter. He recognized the trembling script, not the writer herself, but the emotion embossed on each stroke. Desperation, gratitude, survival. He read slowly. A woman thanking the house for giving her one night of sleep without bruises. A mother telling how her daughter laughed again for the first time after weeks of crying. A teenager admitting she didn't know if she would live to 20, but Harbor Home had made her believe she deserved to. Daniel felt his chest constrict. Each letter pressed into him, layering memories he had tried for decades to bury. Wounded soldiers crying behind makeshift barricades. Young men whispering their mothers' names before he could stop their bleeding. Voices over radio calling for him when he was too far to reach them. His fingers trembled. He didn't make it. That phrase, those 3 words, echoed again. The voice of a medic long gone repeating them in Daniel's head. He shut his eyes hard, but the battlefield replayed anyway. Dirt, blood, the sharp smell of antiseptic swabs, the metallic tang of adrenaline. A siren that never came in time. He sat down heavily on the floor, his back against the scorched stone of the fireplace. The daylight seeping in through the broken windows blurred at the edges. Rex, sensing the shift, moved close and rested his head on Daniel's knee. Warm weight, steady presence, no judgment. just loyalty and witness. Daniel reached down with a shaky hand and stroked Rex's fur, grounding himself in the softness and warmth of the living creature beside him. "I should have saved him," Daniel whispered to no one, to everyone. "I should have gotten there sooner." Rex nudged his arm gently, as if refusing that guilt, as if insisting, "You saved who you could. You're still saving who you can." When Daniel looked at the letters again, a different realization settled inside him, quiet but unshakable. These women, these children, hadn't survived because someone fought a war for them. They'd survived because someone built a refuge for them, a safe room, a doorway they could choose, a place without judgment or punishment. Elias Warren had done that. One man, one broken man, according to Martha. Yet he had created something that rippled years beyond his life. Daniel felt a shift in himself, subtle and deep, like a heavy door within him had been nudged open. If Harbor Home once saved strangers, if it had offered protection when no one else did, does it deserve to vanish now? Daniel whispered. The question hung in the air. Rex lifted his head at the tone, meeting Daniel's gaze with solemn intensity, as if the dog understood the weight behind the question, as if he, too, had already chosen an answer. Daniel placed the letters back into the tin box, hands gentler than when he'd handled explosives overseas. He held the box against his chest for a moment, letting its weight steady his heartbeat. He didn't know yet what he wanted to do, but he knew what he couldn't do. He couldn't ignore this place, couldn't reduce it to a line on a corporate report, couldn't sign a form that would invite bulldozers, not after this. But just as he secured the lid back onto the tin box, another sound echoed through the house. A soft thump. Not from wind, not from settling beams. A rhythmic step from upstairs. Daniel's pulse spiked. Not with fear, but with certainty. Someone else was still here. He and Rex rose in unison. Rex's fur lifted along his spine, ears pointing sharply toward the staircase. Daniel steadied his breath, every instinct he'd learned in the military shifting into focus. He picked up the flashlight from his jacket pocket, clicked it on. The beam cut across the dim hallway, illuminating floating dust motes. "Who's up there?" he called out, not loud, but commanding. No answer. Instead, another step, then silence. Rex growled, deeper this time, ready. Daniel took one slow step toward the staircase, the tin box still in his other hand. And that was when a small shadow flickered at the top of the stairs, human-shaped, but too small to be an adult. Then it vanished. Daniel tightened his jaw. Someone was hiding in Harbor Home, someone who did not want to be found. And he realized, with a cold twist in his stomach, that this house wasn't just holding memories. It was protecting someone right now. Morning light slanted through the real estate office windows, casting long rectangles across the conference room table as Daniel Hart walked in, shoulders tense beneath his red and black buffalo plaid jacket. The air inside felt too warm compared to the crisp mountain wind outside, almost suffocating. Rex trailed behind him, the 7-year-old German Shepherd moving with disciplined calm, though his sharp amber eyes scanned every corner before settling beneath the table, lying down with his head on his paws. Daniel's mind wasn't here. It was still back at Harbor Home, still hearing faint footsteps on the upstairs landing, still seeing the flicker of a small human shadow, still feeling the weight of the letters pressed into that old tin box. He hadn't slept much the night before. Even Rex had paced the hallway twice during the night, pausing at the front door as if expecting someone to knock. Now, as Daniel took his seat, he adjusted the cuff of his jacket and forced himself to breathe evenly. At the opposite end of the table sat Franklin Drew, the investor who had requested today's meeting. Franklin was in his late 50s but tried to appear younger. Dark hair slicked back with too much gel, a trimmed goatee outlining a pronounced chin, and a pair of gold cufflinks shaped like dollar signs. His navy blazer looked tailored for a man with broader shoulders, leaving the fabric too tight across his midsection. He had the kind of smile that showed teeth, but no warmth. His handshake earlier had been firm in a way that bordered on aggressive. His reputation in Pinewood Ridge was unmistakable: ambitious, impatient, and guided by profit more than people. Next to him sat Callie Brandt, Franklin's assistant. She was in her early 30s, tall and thin, with strawberry blonde hair pulled tightly into a bun. Large glasses rested on a slim nose, and she typed quickly on a sleek silver laptop, barely making eye contact. She had an efficient, businesslike demeanor, the kind of person who measured her words and rarely wasted one. Across from Daniel stood Margaret Pierce, his boss, trying to maintain a neutral expression, but failing to hide the concern etched near her eyes. Her silver hair framed her face in a neat bob today, and she wore a deep green blazer that gave her an authoritative presence, though Daniel suspected she felt far less confident than she appeared. Franklin spread a set of printed architectural renderings across the table. So, as I've been saying, this ridge is a gold mine, a boutique resort with elevated cabins, panoramic decks, a wellness spa, everything modern travelers want. We just need this old heap gone. He tapped the rendering of sleek, glass-fronted cabins with exaggerated enthusiasm. Daniel remained silent. Franklin continued, "Our lawyers will handle most of it, but the town requires a full property assessment from an official local agent. That's where you come in." He slid a blank report across the table. "Just document that the home has no historical value and is structurally unsalvageable. The faster we move, the better." Daniel felt his pulse thrum once in his throat. He could picture the real harbor home, the sagging beams, the smoke-marked stones, the fragile board concealing decades-old letters, and a small shadow curling away at the top of the staircase. "You've been to the site already, right?" Franklin asked, leaning back in his chair. "What do you think?" Margaret gave Daniel a warning glance, gentle, protective, urging him to respond cautiously. But Daniel couldn't ignore the truth that had settled inside him like a heavy anchor. "It's not a heap," Daniel said. Franklin blinked, confused. "Excuse me?" "It's not worthless." Daniel kept his voice measured. "And someone might be living inside. I found signs." Callie paused her typing. Franklin raised an eyebrow. "Living? In that dump?" "Maybe a runaway," Daniel said quietly, "or someone who needs help." Franklin let out a dismissive laugh. "Not our problem. The sheriff will clear them out. Just focus on the paperwork." Rex lifted his head at the shift in tone, glancing between the men. Daniel's jaw tensed. "There's more you should know," he said, reaching into his bag. He didn't pull out the tin box. He wasn't ready for that. but he placed the printed deed history on the table. This house once served as a shelter, a safe place for women and children escaping violence. A veteran built it after the war. Franklin blinked slowly, then let out a sharp sigh. Hart, that's ancient history. This town needs revenue, not ghost stories. Daniel's spine straightened. For most of his career, he had been agreeable, steady, predictable. He followed orders. He filled out forms. He avoided conflict because conflict reminded him too much of sand and blood and the weight of men dying under his hands. But Harbor Home had stirred something in him. Maybe it was the letters. Maybe the footprints. Maybe the memory of Elias Warren, another veteran who turned his wounds into sanctuary. Or maybe it was the first time in a long while Daniel had felt like he could do something that mattered again. Franklin shoved the report closer. Just write that it's structurally unsound. It's old, Daniel replied, not unsalvageable. Hart, Franklin snapped, don't make this difficult. Everyone benefits if this land is cleared. Everyone. Daniel looked at Margaret again. Her eyes pleaded silently. Be careful, Daniel. But there was a trembling in her hands, too. Something telling him she understood why he was hesitating. The veteran inhaled slowly. His left hand settled on Rex's head beneath the table. The dog's fur was warm, grounding. Franklin leaned forward. Well? Daniel felt the entire room narrow to a single point. A thin sheet of paper. A signature line. A decision that would decide the fate of a house built for broken people. Something inside him clicked into place. A memory. The sound of a young soldier choking on dust, whispering, "Please don't leave me." And another. The quiet bravery inside those letters, written by women who escaped darkness and found refuge. Daniel straightened his back and set the report aside. No. The word came out steady, final, echoing. Franklin's expression twisted. What did you say? No, Daniel repeated. I won't lie on the report, and I won't help you tear that house down. Silence snapped through the room like a breaking branch. Callie glanced up from her laptop, startled. Margaret closed her eyes briefly, as if absorbing the blow. Rex pressed closer to Daniel's leg, sensing the spike of tension. Franklin leaned forward, voice low and cold. Do you understand what you're doing? This project is worth millions. Some things aren't for sale, Daniel said. He wasn't sure if he meant the house or himself. Franklin stood abruptly. Pierce, control your agent. Margaret had regained her composure, but her voice held steel. Mr. Drew, our agents are obligated to report honestly. If the property cannot be declared valueless, I'll find someone who will, the investor snapped. Then, turning to Daniel, and I'll make sure the board hears about your insubordination. He shoved the documents into his briefcase with movements sharp and irritated. Callie gathered her laptop, avoiding everyone's gaze. The two exited, the door slamming hard enough to rattle the blinds. Margaret sank into a chair, rubbing her temples. Daniel, I don't think you understand the damage this could cause. I do, he said. I just can't pretend that place is meaningless. She sighed, looking older than she had that morning. This could cost you your job. Daniel nodded. I know. Margaret studied him with quiet sadness. You've never said no before. Maybe I should have, he murmured. With nothing else to add, he stepped out of the conference room. Rex followed, trotting beside him like a silent sentinel. Outside, the cold air slapped against Daniel's face. He stood at the edge of the parking lot, staring at the mountains. The red and black jacket felt heavier around his shoulders. Had he saved a house or ruined his future? He tightened his jacket, exhaling a long plume of white breath. But just as he reached for his truck door, Rex suddenly growled. Low, alert, focused. Daniel looked up. At the far end of the parking lot, partially hidden by a row of bare trees, someone was standing there, small, still, watching him. And the moment Daniel blinked, the figure vanished. The winter storm was still a gray smear on the horizon when Daniel Hart unlocked the office door that morning, stepping into the quiet building with Rex padding close behind him. The air held a certain heaviness, the kind that warned the townsfolk of Pinewood Ridge that snow was coming early this year, thick, wet, and unforgiving. Daniel unbuttoned his red and black buffalo plaid jacket, shook the cold from his shoulders, and bent to scratch Rex behind the ear. The German Shepherd leaned into the touch, though his body stayed alert, his nose twitching as if he sensed something unusual in the stillness. Daniel didn't know how right Rex was until the tap came at the glass door. It was light, almost timid, but enough to send a ripple of tension through the dog at his feet. Rex's ears pricked up. Daniel turned, standing outside, framed by drifting flakes of icy dust, was a woman holding a child close to her side. When Daniel opened the door, he smelled damp wool and fear before either of them spoke. The woman stepped inside hesitantly, her grip tight around the boy's shoulder. "Are you Daniel Hart?" Her voice quavered, though she spoke with a kind of practiced bravery, someone used to pretending she was not afraid even when she was. She was in her late 40s, perhaps early 50s. Tall, slender, in the way stress carves a body thinner. Cheeks drawn slightly, though once she might have been soft-faced. Her hair was chestnut brown, streaked with premature silver, cut to her chin and tucked behind one ear. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and beneath her eyes were faint purple shadows that told their own story of many sleepless nights. She held a photograph, an old, blurred picture of Harbor Home. "My name is Claire Marin," she said. "This is my grandson, Toby." The boy, about 9 or 10, peered up at Daniel with wide hazel eyes that flicked nervously toward Rex. He was small for his age, thin wrists sticking out from the sleeves of a too-big gray hoodie, curls of sandy brown hair hanging over a forehead dotted with freckles. The moment Rex gave a low, soft chuff, gentle and friendly, Toby's posture changed. He let go of Claire's coat and took one step forward. Claire tightened her grip reflexively, panic flashing in her eyes. But Toby shook free gently and knelt before Rex. And just like that, fear melted from his face. Toby wrapped his small arms around the dog's neck, pressing his cheek into the thick fur. Rex went still, then slowly leaned into the embrace with deep, patient understanding. Daniel had seen Rex comfort soldiers shaking in the dark. He recognized the same quiet magic now. Claire's breath wavered. He hasn't slept through the night in months," she whispered. "Not since—" She stopped herself. Daniel gestured toward a chair. "Come sit, both of you." Claire perched on the chair's edge, hands twisting the photograph. Toby remained beside Rex, hands gently fisted in the dog's fur. like it was the only solid thing in his world. Daniel leaned forward. "Tell me what brought you here." Claire swallowed hard. "My mother. She passed 2 weeks ago." Her voice softened with grief, but steadied with resolve. "And before she died, she told me something she hadn't spoken of in decades about the time she escaped my father when he became violent. She ran to a house, a safe house." She lifted the photograph slightly. "She said it saved her life. She said if I ever had nowhere else to go, go up the hill. Harbor Home will take you in." Daniel's chest tightened. Claire looked down, gathering strength. And he didn't understand. I didn't even know she had a place like that. But yesterday, she inhaled shakily. My daughter's husband, Toby's father, showed up drunk again. He broke the window. He shouted things I can't repeat. Toby pressed his face deeper into Rex's neck, shoulders trembling. Claire's voice cracked. "I grabbed Toby. We ran. I didn't know where else to go. So we drove all night." She held out the photograph like a plea, like proof. "I don't know if I'm even allowed to be here. But my mother trusted that house. She trusted the man who built it. She said it saved her once. And I'm hoping, praying, it can save us too." Silence stretched between them. Outside, wind brushed against the windows like a whisper. Daniel didn't move for several seconds. His mind flashed back to the letters, the ones written by terrified women who had clung to the promise of safety inside Harbor Home. Those trembling lines of ink were now sitting in front of him, not as faded pages, but as a woman with a battered spirit and a child clinging to his dog for warmth. Claire looked away. "I know I shouldn't burden you. I know you're just a real estate agent. But if you could tell me who runs it now or who manages it or—" "No one," Daniel said softly. Claire froze. "No one?" "It's abandoned," he admitted. "Has been for years." Her composure cracked, her shoulders slumped. Behind her eyes, something broke, quietly, without sound. But Daniel saw it. He stood slowly, walked toward the window, then turned back. He couldn't tell her the whole truth. Couldn't tell her he'd seen footprints. Couldn't tell her the house might not be as empty as the town believed. But he could tell her what mattered. "You're not wrong to come here," Daniel said. "Your mother was right. That place has saved people before." Claire blinked, confused. "But you said it's abandoned." "It's standing," Daniel corrected. "And it's not beyond saving." She stared at him, searching. Rex lifted his head, eyes shifting from Toby to Daniel, waiting. Daniel took a deep breath. A deep, decisive breath that seemed to pull something from inside him he'd forgotten he had. "I can't run a shelter," he said. "Not officially, not yet. But I have the key. I can get you inside. You and Toby can stay, for now." Claire's lips parted, trembling. "Why would you do that for us?" "Because someone once built that place to help people like you," Daniel said, "and I think he'd want it to keep doing that." The truth was more complicated. Daniel needed this as much as they did. Needed to save someone. Needed to rewrite the part of himself that had never forgiven the past. Claire covered her mouth, tears welling. "Thank you," she whispered. Toby finally released Rex, stepping closer to Daniel as if sensing the shift. "Will it be safe?" the boy asked quietly. Daniel knelt so his eyes met Toby's. "Rex and I will make sure of it," he promised. Toby nodded, trusting him instantly, perhaps because children can see truths that adults talk themselves out of. Daniel stood, pulled the key from his jacket pocket, and placed it in Claire's trembling hand. Go before the storm hits. I'll meet you there after I sort things out here. Claire looked at him like she was looking at a lifeline. Thank you, she breathed again. Thank you. As she and Toby stepped toward the door, snow began falling outside, soft at first, then heavier. Toby hesitated, glancing once more at Rex. Can he come too? He'll be there soon, Daniel assured. Toby smiled. A small, fragile thing, but real, and followed Claire outside. When the door closed, the room felt colder. Rex looked up at Daniel. The veteran exhaled slowly. He knew what helping Claire meant. He knew the laws he would be brushing against. The investor he'd just angered. The town council that rarely liked surprises. I know, buddy, Daniel murmured, stroking Rex's head. This is going to be trouble. Rex gave a quiet, decisive huff. Daniel grabbed his jacket and headed for the exit. But before he turned off the lights, he paused at the doorway, staring into the empty office. A realization settled over him, heavy as the storm rolling in. Harbor Home had found people to save again. The question was whether Daniel would have enough time, enough strength, to protect them before whatever had been lurking in that house made itself known. Because something was already there, waiting. The storm arrived like a living creature, dragging its icy breath across the ridge and shaking the old trees until they groaned against the weight of winter. By the time evening fell, snow battered the windows of Daniel Hart's small home in relentless sheets, and the wind howled like something wounded trying to claw its way inside. Inside the dimly lit living room, Daniel sat restlessly on the edge of the couch, his elbows on his knees. The fire in the stone hearth crackled weakly, unable to chase away the anxiety creeping beneath his skin. He kept glancing at his phone, the screen blank and cold. Claire and Toby were up on North Ridge, in Harbor Home, alone. Except, maybe not alone. That was the part that gnawed at him. The memory of that small shadow darting across the stairs days earlier clung to him, refusing to release its grip. Rex stood by the front door, his entire body tense. His thick coat bristled with unease, and he stared into the narrow window beside the door as if expecting something, or someone, to appear. Lightning cracked across the sky, illuminating the snow-drenched world outside for a single heartbeat. Rex growled, low and warning. Daniel's muscles locked. What is it? He whispered, rising slowly. Then came the sound, barely audible at first, then unmistakable. A vehicle engine. Tires crunching, a heavy motor forcing itself up the old dirt road toward North Ridge. Daniel's breath stilled. Rex moved to the door, tail rigid, stance alert. The hairs along his spine stood like needles. Daniel didn't need to look outside to know. Someone was coming, and there was only one person who made Claire tremble even at the mention of his name. Daniel grabbed his keys without hesitation. He shrugged into his red and black buffalo plaid jacket, zipped it up against the storm's teeth, and opened the door. The wind slammed against him instantly, biting through the seams of his jacket and whipping icy flurries into his face. Rex bounded out first, snow erupting beneath his paws. Into the truck! Daniel shouted above the wind. Rex leapt into the passenger side before Daniel even opened the door fully. They were moving within seconds, the truck's engine growling against the storm as Daniel sped toward North Ridge. The wipers struggled to shove away the thick snow, and the headlights barely carved a path through the swirling white. But Daniel knew this land. He had driven it in daylight, in fog, in rain. Tonight, he would drive it in fear. Fear not for himself, but for the two people who had come searching for the last scrap of hope they had left. It took nearly 10 minutes to reach the foot of the ridge. 10 minutes of skidding tires, clenched knuckles, and silent prayers he hadn't said since the war. As he rounded the final bend, the shape of another vehicle came into view. A large black pickup truck, older model but powerful, sat crooked on the muddy slope leading to Harbor Home. Headlights blazed through the storm. The engine idled like a beast waiting for the kill. Even through the wall of snow, Daniel could make out the silhouette of the man standing outside the truck, shoulders broad and posture aggressive. Daniel eased to a stop behind him, and the moment the truck's engine cut off, Rex barked sharply, once, as if announcing that danger was confirmed. The man turned. Caleb Marin, Claire's son-in-law, Toby's father, a man whose name carried the quiet venom of old bruises and broken trust. He was in his mid-30s, tall and thickly built, the type of man who swung his weight around as easily as he swung his fists. His hair was dark blonde, plastered to his head in the storm, and a trimmed beard framed a jaw tight with fury. Even from several yards away, Daniel could see the wildness in his blue-gray eyes. Stormy, unhinged, desperate. A man who believed the world owed him obedience. A man who couldn't fathom someone leaving him. Caleb shouted into the storm, voice ragged. "Claire! Toby, get down here!" Daniel stepped out of the truck, boots sinking into the slush, his jacket instantly soaked. "Caleb Marin," he called, raising his voice above the wind. Caleb whipped toward him with such force that snow sprayed from his shoulders. "Who the hell are you?" "Daniel Hart." Caleb's eyes narrowed. "Where's my wife?" "She's not here for you to take," Daniel said, standing firm. "She came to get away from you." Caleb snarled, taking a step forward. "They're my family. You don't get to hide them." Rex leapt from the truck, landing with a deep growl, placing himself between Daniel and the enraged man. Caleb flinched slightly at the sight of the dog. Rex looked like a force of nature himself. Fur spiked by the wind, muscles taut, teeth barely visible under a lifted lip. "Call off the mutt," Caleb spat. Daniel didn't move. "Rex won't attack unless you force him." Caleb jerked his chin toward Harbor Home, barely visible through the storm. "I know they're up there. I tracked their damn phone. So unless you want someone hurt, you won't get in my way." Daniel felt the old instinct rising inside him, the one from battlefields where hesitation meant death. He had been trained to run toward danger, not away from it. But this danger was different. This time, he wasn't trying to save a soldier. He was trying to save a child, and a woman who had run for her life. Thunder cracked overhead. Caleb lunged forward. Rex growled louder, but Daniel lifted a hand slightly. "Stay." Rex froze, trembling with readiness but obeying. Daniel stepped closer to Caleb until only a few feet separated them. Snow plastered to his eyelashes, and the cold sliced into his skin. But his voice, the voice that once commanded during helicopter rescues, during evacuations in the dead of night, came steady and sharp. "I'm not letting you past me." Caleb's face twisted. "You're just some washed-up soldier playing hero." His arm shot forward, shoving Daniel hard in the chest. Daniel slid back a step in the slush, but maintained his stance. Caleb shoved again. Daniel caught himself on the railing post. Rex barked, a thunderous eruption of protective rage. Caleb swung an arm back as if preparing to strike the dog. That was the line. Daniel surged forward, grabbing Caleb's wrist mid-swing. The two men collided, boots sliding, bodies straining against the storm's fury. Caleb was younger, heavier, unpredictable. Daniel was older, but disciplined, his movements efficient, controlled, honed by years of life-or-death scenarios. Caleb roared in frustration and tried to throw Daniel off, but Rex rushed forward, intercepting, positioning himself between Caleb and the steps leading up to Harbor Home. Daniel twisted Caleb's wrist, just enough to break the momentum, but not enough to injure. "Stop!" Daniel barked. Lightning flashed, illuminating Caleb's contorted, furious face. "You think you can keep her from me?" Caleb spat. "You think you're some goddamn savior?" "No," Daniel said. "I'm just not letting you hurt them." Caleb shoved him again, harder this time, sending Daniel stumbling back into the railing. Pain shot up his shoulder. Caleb seized the chance, breaking free and charging toward the steps. That was when Rex leapt, powerful and precise. He landed in front of Caleb, planting his paws firmly in the snow, teeth bared in a warning that left no room for misinterpretation. Caleb skidded to a halt, disbelief and fear flickering across his face. "Call him off!" he shouted. Daniel, gasping from the impact, straightened. "Only if you back away." For a moment, the storm itself seemed to hold still. Caleb stared at Rex, the dog's unwavering stance, the intelligence in his eyes, the silent promise that he would protect the people inside that house at any cost. Finally, Caleb's rage cracked, not into remorse, but into fear-driven retreat. He backed down the steps, slipping once, caught himself, and stumbled toward his truck. "This isn't over," he shouted. "She's my wife. He's my kid." Daniel didn't move. Rex didn't blink. Caleb climbed into his truck, slammed the door, revved the engine, and fishtailed violently down the muddy slope before disappearing into the white blur of the storm. When silence finally settled, Daniel's legs weakened. He braced himself against the railing, drawing deep breaths. Rex pressed his head against Daniel's hip, steady and warm despite the storm soaking his fur. Daniel looked toward Harbor Home, the faint outline of its roof barely visible. Claire and Toby were safe, for now. But what happened on that wooden porch tonight would spread across town by morning. He had crossed a line, not one of violence, but of responsibility, the kind that couldn't be undone. And deep in the storm's fading roar, Daniel sensed that whatever had been hiding inside Harbor Home had witnessed everything and was waiting for what came next. Morning broke slowly over Pinewood Ridge, as if the storm had wrung the night dry and left dawn too tired to rise. Snow clung in heavy sheets to the branches, bending them into bows, and the sky wore a pale, exhausted blue. The kind of morning that feels like the world exhaled after nearly breaking. Daniel Hart stood outside Harbor Home, boots sunk deep into the fresh white drifts, his breath rising in soft clouds. His red and black buffalo plaid jacket was still damp along the hem from the night before, but he didn't feel the cold. Not after everything that had happened. Rex stayed close at his side, moving with an uneven but determined gait. The bandage around his shoulder peeked through the dark fur, white gauze against black and tan. Even injured, the German Shepherd held himself high, ears alert, tail steady, as if refusing to show weakness after the previous night's confrontation. Daniel ran a hand gently over the dog's neck. "Good boy," he murmured, voice thick with something he wasn't ready to unpack yet. Rex leaned into him with quiet pride. Footsteps crunched behind them. Sheriff Amos Dillard approached, his heavy winter coat brushing snow from low shrubs as he walked. The sheriff was in his late 60s, broad-shouldered but soft at the waist, with a gray mustache that covered most of his upper lip. Deep wrinkles radiated from his eyes, built from decades of squinting through both sunlight and human trouble. He moved slowly this morning, not injured, just weighed down by the events of the night. "We've got him," Amos said, stopping beside Daniel. "Caleb Marin won't be bothering Claire or the boy again, not for a long time." Amos had arrested Caleb at first light. The violence, the threat, the trespassing, the intoxicated pursuit, plus the cell phone locator logs Daniel had recorded after noticing Caleb's erratic driving, were more than enough. Even in a small town known for leniency, some lines couldn't be blurred. The sheriff angled his chin toward Rex. "How's the dog?" "He'll be fine," Daniel said. "Vet said the cut wasn't deep." "Good." Amos shifted, studying Daniel with a stern fatherly gaze. "You could have been killed. Possibly. And you knew that." "Yes." "And you still went up here anyway." Daniel didn't answer immediately. He looked toward the house instead. Snow coated the roof in a clean sheet of white, softening the scars of its age. It looked like a completely different building in the morning. Forgiving, peaceful, almost gentle. "Someone had to," Daniel finally said. The sheriff huffed, half disappointment, half reluctant admiration. "You're going to give me gray hairs I don't even have left." "Sorry," Daniel said, though neither of them believed the apology. Amos patted his shoulder roughly before turning away, boots crunching as he trudged back toward his patrol truck. "Take care of them, Hart. We'll finish the Gisson paperwork later." When the sheriff's truck rumbled away down the hill, the world settled into silence again. Daniel exhaled. The storm might have passed, but the aftershocks were only beginning. Inside the house, he heard Claire's voice, soft murmurs through the wooden walls, the kind used by someone afraid to disturb the fragile peace around her. A moment later, the front door opened. Claire stepped out onto the porch, wrapped in one of Harbor Home's old quilts. The quilt looked handmade, faded floral pieces stitched together with uneven thread, something crafted with love long before either of them was born. She looked different this morning, still pale, still tired, but there was a flicker of something new beneath her eyes. Hope. Or maybe the remnants of relief after a storm. One barely survives. "Sheriff Dillard said he'll be back later?" she asked quietly. "Yes," Daniel replied. "It's over, Claire. He won't touch you or Toby again." Her eyes shimmered, the kind of tears that weren't born from fear, but from the sudden, overwhelming release after fear breaks. "Thank you, Daniel, for everything. I don't know how to—" She stopped, swallowing hard. How to put it into words. Toby appeared behind her, rubbing one eye with the back of his hand. He wore a borrowed sweater, sleeves too long, and socks that mismatched. But he looked calm. A boy again, instead of a trembling shadow. The moment Toby saw Rex, he hurried forward and threw his arms around the dog's neck. Rex lowered his head, letting the boy cling to him, tail sweeping the porch in a slow wag. Watching them, Claire covered her mouth as another tear slipped free. "He hasn't hugged anyone in so long," she whispered. Daniel forced himself to breathe deeply, to stay steady. "You two can stay until you find something permanent," he said. "We'll figure it out." "We?" Claire echoed softly. "There's no one else doing this." Daniel blinked. He hadn't realized how true that was. Before he could respond, the sound of approaching steps rose from the hill trail. A small group of women came into view, 4 of them, bundled in winter coats, scarves wrapped high around their faces. Daniel recognized each immediately. Carla Jennings, in her early 70s, short and stout, with steel gray curls under her knitted hat, formerly ran the local bakery. Beatrice Rowland, a wiry woman with sharp cheekbones, a cropped salt and pepper haircut, and a history of volunteering at every fundraiser since the 1990s. Linda Grant, tall and awkward but sweet, a gentle widow with round glasses that always fogged when she walked in from the cold. And Marie Holloway, barely over 60, petite but fierce, with copper hair that had refused to gray even after years of stress raising 3 grandchildren on her own. They were pillars of the town, mothers, grandmothers, survivors of things the town rarely talked about but never forgot. "Daniel Hart," Carla announced, cheeks flushed from the cold. "You've caused quite the stir." Daniel huffed. "That seems to be a pattern lately." Beatrice smirked. "Good. This town needs stirring." Linda stepped forward shyly. "We heard what happened last night, with Claire, with the boy, and with that man. And with your dog fighting him off," Marie added, giving Rex an approving nod. "Good boy," she cooed. Rex wagged once, graciously accepting the compliment. Carla clasped her gloved hands. "We want to help." Daniel blinked. "Help with what?" "This place," Beatrice said simply. "The shelter, the home." He looked between them, uncertain. "It's barely standing." "So are most of us," Carla shot back. "Doesn't mean we can't do some good." Marie stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Women like Claire need somewhere to go. They always have. And this house, it was built for that. Everyone in town knows the history. We thought Harbor Home was gone for good, until last night." Linda nodded enthusiastically. "You saved them, Daniel. You and your dog. People are talking." "A lot," Beatrice added. "For once, it's talk worth hearing." Claire stared at the group, stunned. Toby clung to Rex, watching with wide eyes. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck. I don't know how to run something like this." Carla waved a dismissive hand. "You don't have to run it. You just have to keep doing what you're already doing." Marie stepped beside him. Standing guard. The simple phrase struck something deep inside him. That had been his life once, standing guard over wounded soldiers, guarding the dust and heat and terror. But here, at this quiet house on a quiet hill, guarding felt different, lighter, right. Daniel swallowed. "You really think the town will support this? The investor already pulled out," Beatrice said. "Apparently he doesn't like buildings where angry dogs and angry veterans bite back." Carla snorted. "Shame." Daniel looked down at Rex, who stared back with steady amber eyes. "What do you think, boy?" Rex thumped his tail. Decision made. "All right," Daniel said finally. "If we do this, we do it quietly. No big signs, no attention, just a door that opens when someone knocks." Carla's eyes warmed. "Then it's settled." The women headed toward the house, already discussing repairs, supplies, paint colors. As they passed, Toby tugged Daniel's sleeve. "Are we safe now?" "You're safe," Daniel said, "as long as we're here." "And Rex too?" Toby asked. Daniel smiled, especially Rex. Toby nodded, satisfied, and ran inside. Claire lingered only a moment before whispering, "Thank you, Daniel, truly." Then she followed her grandson. Daniel sat on the porch steps. Rex eased down beside him, resting his head gently on Daniel's thigh. The world was quiet, peaceful. For the first time in years, Daniel felt something inside him unwind, like a knot he'd spent half a lifetime tightening without knowing how to loosen. He glanced at his old military watch, the hands ticking softly. He wasn't a soldier anymore, but he was something else now. A keeper of a threshold, a guardian of a house built from wounds and rebuilt with hope. And as long as a man in a red and black plaid jacket and an aging German shepherd sat on that porch, Harbor Home would never again be just an abandoned shape on a forgotten hill. It had found its name again, its purpose, its heartbeat. And Daniel finally realized this was where he belonged. Sometimes the greatest miracles don't come as flashes of light or heavenly signs from above. Sometimes God works quietly through a weary veteran who refuses to turn away, through a loyal dog who stands guard in the storm, through the courage of a woman who chooses to protect a child, and through a community that remembers how to care for one another. Harbor Home was rebuilt not by perfect people, but by broken hearts choosing faith over fear. And maybe that is God's gentlest miracle of all, reminding us that even in the darkest winter, He places ordinary angels in our path. A neighbor, a friend, or a stranger in a red and black coat who shows up when we need it most. As you go back to your own everyday life, may you carry this truth with you. Every act of kindness echoes farther than you know. God sees it, God blesses it, and God can use you to bring light to someone else's valley. If this story touched your heart today, please consider sharing it, leaving a comment, or subscribing so we can bring more hope into the world together. May God watch over you, protect your home, and grant you peace in every season of your life. God bless you.